Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're well and having a lovely day, doing whatever makes you happy in your happy space. Now today's tutorial is going to be a different one. I will be making a doggy coat. So it's really cold here in Melbourne, Australia, and yesterday was Sunday. I decided was to make a coat for Jackson because obviously I am the one who walks him, and I know that it's cold outside and the weather has certainly turned a lot more chillier towards the end of the week, and so I didn't want him being cold. Anyway, I decided was to buy him a coat, and I went looking online and they're probably coming up around 37, 40, $50, and I thought this is ridiculous. I'm not paying $50+ plus tax to buy a doggy coat. I'm going to go make one. So on Saturday, I headed towards the fabric store and I picked up some of this. So this is Shepra. It is Shepra leatherette, that's it. So it's really beautiful. So it's got that really soft material, blankety material on the inner side, and on the outer side you got that leatherette material. So I thought this will be perfect. I bought half a yard or half a meter. I bought, and it cost me, I think it was $18. Let me check the receipt. $18.50. So I thought, you know what? So I have loads more. So this is what's left. Now he likes to cuddle up on mine's, which doesn't have the it's just the fleece, the blankety texture. So I have made it through. So I have bought this material and I've made it through. This was around, I think, just before Christmas. I'd made one, or sorry, I shouldn't say, at the beginning of the winter period last year I made a throw, and I'd plan on using it on the back of a quilt, and so I decided, no, I'm not going to bother. I'll just make it into a throw. So I have this on the sofa, which I cuddled up to as it's winter time, but he likes to, every time I turn around he's grabbing it. So I'm going to make a little blanket for him with the balance. So I've got probably about half of it left, if not more, because I've only used a little bit just to make the doggy coat. So I'm going to take you through today. I've actually quilted it. It looks amazing, and it only cost me $18.50. So sometimes it's easier to make things if you can make it. All right, so let me know how I did. I've actually included a clip of how I actually what it looks like on him. So we just got back from a walk, and putting it on was yeah, he kept biting at it because obviously I don't think he's ever worn anything like that before. But by the time we got outside and he got really excited, he's going for his walk, he totally forgot it was on him. But I must admit, I am very proud of myself. It looks really, really cool on him as well. But I've taken you through the steps if you want to make one for your little doggy, if you've got one. But so much more cheaper than actually going and buying it out. So I probably would have ended up paying probably around, I don't know, $55, $60, because the ones that was like $37, $40 were very cheapy. All right, so let's get started. All right, so as you can see, you need to measure him. So I've put him on top of my table, which I tell you was not the easiest thing to do. So you really need him to be standing so that you can get the measurements. And as you can see, it was, yeah, it was he kept sitting down all the time. It just wasn't the easiest thing to do. Nevertheless, you need from the end of the top of his tail, his backbone, from where his neck is, where his leash is where you really need to get that top measurement. So that's the back length you need. Um, yeah, it was a real pain just to get him. You see me laughing there. It was not easy at all, but you need the back length across his back. And you see me just talking to him, saying, Jackson, please just behave. Just stay still for 2 minutes. Um, but I tried my best to get his measurement, but his back length you need across the back what his neck circumference is and his shoulder. So I'm still trying. Look at that. It's been what? Almost 2 minutes. So as you make the measurements, I definitely say to write them down, but I'll put all the measurements that, or the title of the measurements that you need. So back length across the back, neck circumference, which I just did, his shoulder and chest, what it actually measures. You also need around his torso, like his belly, just to know how wide you need to make that, definitely, and the depth of his shoulder. Um, I was going to add something else to it, but I didn't really have the time and I thought it wasn't really needed. So I am snapping my fingers just to get him to sit still and listen. But yeah, so I'm measuring around his chest now. I probably should have turned him around the other way, but it was, yeah, as you saw. But that's his chest I'm measuring now. So his back length, across back, neck circumference, his shoulder and chest, and his torso that you really need to measure. Once I had that, I think I was ready, but it's best to really get it while they're standing. I think that's the more accurate measurement. And as you can see, I kept lifting him up over and over just to get. So I'm now about to measure his torso. Yeah, more or less the widest part of him where his belly is, basically, so I can get that measurement. That needs to be how wide it really is so it fits around him nice and comfy. But other than that, he was all right. I think in the end, I sort of won, I think. But I kept going over and over again just to make sure I got the measurements correct. Because as you can see, he wasn't keeping still at all. But I think I changed the measurements like twice, but it was like very close to each other. So what I did was choose the nearest one, just to make sure that, it was in between, is it either or. But in the end, I gave up. I was like, okay, fine. I'm going to work with what I have. And you can see me going over the measurements again, which is basically, as I said, I got 1 or 2 digits difference from what the original one was. But it turned out to be okay, and I'm feeling that for his backbone where it ends. So I'm just measuring there just to make sure I get it right. And just all the way top of it. As you can see, the dog wouldn't just stand still. I'm going to sit again, and there he goes. So I gave up, decided to give him a treat and say thank you. And yeah, I think that, look at that, still sitting down. Can't even wait for me to give him the treat. But he was all right. He didn't fuss too much. I think it was just keeping him busy up there as he was the first time he was standing there. Alrighty then. So let's move on to the next stage. And I'll give him a bit of a hug to say thank you. He was pretty good, to be honest. He wasn't that bad. All right, so I've transferred all of the information on this A4 sheet of paper. I've used two and I've stuck it together with some sellotape and I've measured it all on. Well, I've written all the measurements down, measured it onto the paper. So what I'm showing you now is where I'm going to cut it and give it a curve. So rather than have straight corners, so it's a lot more easier. So I'm going to use my scissors and I use one of my scissors here for paper only. And I'm just cutting the curve out so that once I put it onto my fabric, it should have a nice curve to it. And I think that's going to make it fit a lot more nicely and make it look more improved rather than just having those straight corners. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. I would say take your time. If you feel that the corner isn't as nice and neat, remember, however, the paper is pattern is how the actual thing is going to come out. So just make sure and get your curves nice and neat. You can probably use a smaller scissors if you want to do this task here, but just take your time and cut all around it. Okay. So as I'm cutting here, I'm thinking that I need to make sure that both of the curves on each of the corners are exactly the same. So you could just fold the paper in half and cut the curve just to make sure you get the same. So that's why I'm going over it again, just to make sure it looks very similar. Because remember what I said, whatever the paper looks like, your paper pattern looks like, is what your fabric is going to cut out, because this is just an example. Now, looking at the fabric, the paper there, you can see it has this end that's sticking out there, that's long at the front we're looking at here. And that area there is simply the neck. That's where his neck straps are actually going to be. So you see me cutting out the curve. So that from the top of that curve right down to the bottom is his neck there. So hopefully you understand the pattern. But also remember that this is just one side that I have done. Yeah, remember when you're in sewing land, let's call it that, it's all about cutting on the fold. All right. So this is just one side, and obviously once I do the cutting for the actual coat, it is actually going to be folded. So just do remember that. All right. So you can see I'm showing it to you there where the curves are. I think I did went ahead and readjust, and I just remembered I needed to do that area as well because that's the back of the coat, and that needs to be nice and curved as well. So I just wanted to make sure and keep the same sort of pattern going through all the way around so it looks nice and tidy. Okay, so I'm just cleaning up all my bits and bobs here now. Okay, so now on to the shepherd. Love this. It's so beautiful and soft. Now, the reason why I chose this is because I didn't want to add a lining, and I thought the leatherette can work as my lining and I can use it in that way. So rather than, buying just the fleece area and then having to go and get a suitable type of lining for it, I thought, no, I'm going to use it. This is going to be a more long lasting and it will work very well. Now, here I'm fitting it on and I've put it right to the end. But then as I'm thinking, you know what? I really need to give it some room. But it didn't dawn on me. I was just about to cut and I was like, no, something just need to make sure. So when I remembered now, that's why I wrote seam allowance. So, and I'm using a half an inch of a seam allowance just to remember. Now, looking back now, you don't necessarily need it because, but I would definitely say add it. All right, just as a precaution. I mean, it's what you do in sewing, isn't it? You give yourself that seam allowance. So I am going to get some pins and I'm going to pin it all down so that the paper don't move. And notice the fabric is folded. Yeah, the fabric is folded. So remember that straight side where towards the end where the fold, that is the back. Just make sure you get that right. That is the back. And another pattern looks a bit awkward, but that's the measurements of one side of Jackson, if that makes sense. All right, so I'm just making sure I have a little bit of a seam allowance there, and I'm making sure it's nice and flat. And then I'm going to start pinning so that it doesn't move. That's the last thing I want. So just make sure you do that. And then once you're happy with it, then the next objective now is to start cutting, basically. That's it. So I use some long, strong pins here so that to hold that in place so that it doesn't move. That area I'm pinning there, that's the neck area. That's the arm that's going to go around his neck or just sitting on his chest. And that's what it looks like once it's all pinned. And then I reckon it's time to start cutting and really nice sharp scissors to get this done properly. You could use your rotary cutter if you're happy to do freehand, which I considered, but I didn't want to mess around with it. I thought, you know what, I'm going to just stick with the scissors. So again, giving myself the seam allowance, and I just continue to follow the pattern and cut as is.
Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're giving me wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me.
All right, so it's binding time now. So obviously now I don't have to do a lining because I'm going to use a leatherette as my lining. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is choosing some scraps of binding that I have here, and I'm choosing sort of brownish, grayish colors, and I have them so on white spots on the color. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. So I'm just going to choose those, and then from there, choose the appropriate and make it into a binding strip. All right, so it's time for a second fit now, and just to make sure that everything measures nicely around it. He's been a little bit better this time. So I'm just going to make sure and just pins and just make sure it's okay. And all right, so it's time to do some binding now to add that onto it, onto the leatherette side is where I'm starting. And what I would say though is definitely to use your walking foot. It will enable you to get it a lot more quickly because it's quite thick underneath there, isn't it? So I'm trying to line it up really nicely on the end. I've given myself a marker in terms of how wide I want it to go on. And starting on the leatherette side, I thought was a little bit easier. I would say to lengthen the stitch length. That's what I'm doing there so that it moves a lot more slowly. Take your time, just do small increments all the way around the curves as I'm moving there. And just take your time and go around slowly, really. You will get it done nice and easily, but just keep it consistent and keep going with it. It is really quite easy to do binding on curves. To me, I think is one of the easiest thing to do, but just take your time and go slowly. When you get to like the corners, I what I did was stretched it out, so I made it long, so you can see where I've turned it there. So I've just made it long, and then I just continued. All right. So that's it basically, but just take your time.
Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're giving me wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my apple.
All right, so let's do some quilting lines. I have already done the first diagonal set. I'm going to do the second set now. I'm using my long quilted ruler and also I'm going to be using a heat erasable pen. So all I'm going to be doing here is doing some crisscross lines. So as I said, I've done the first set already. I'm starting in the middle and then going all the way down to the other side. The lines are 2 inches apart. That is to be able to quilt on those lines. So I get those quilting crisscross pattern. I am taking those lines all the way down, even on the arms or the strap that goes around the belly part, as well as the area where it goes around his neck at the top where my hand is at the moment. So that's what I'm doing. Okay, so I would definitely say a little trick here. I think I did it the wrong way round. Ideally, it would be best to do the grid lines first before you add the binding. Nevertheless, you can work a way around that. So once I've done that, I'm going to go on the sewing machine and do the crisscross using my walking foot to get it done faster. All right, at this stage, I'm using my walking foot to add the grid lines. I have already done the first set, and this is the second set yet again. So what I am doing here is because I have already done the binding, I am locking the stitches in at the beginning and then locking it in at the end as well, and then cutting the thread. That is to ensure that I don't have those pieces of thread sticking out and it can easily unravel. So that's what I'm doing, just locking, sewing, and definitely locking at the end. Also, what you need to make sure is that you lengthen your stitch, because remember there's a lot of layers, even though you are using the walking foot. My machine unthreaded, so I'm just rethreading. Okay, and yeah, but you must lengthen your stitch. If you notice, mine is 4.5 at the moment, so that's pretty long. So there is a lot of layers. Don't use your 1/4 inch feet for this, you're going to struggle. All right, so I'm just going to continue with that. Lock the stitch. As soon as I finish, cut the thread and move on to the next one.
Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're giving me wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight.
So the next stage now is to add your Velcro. So I had to search everywhere. I didn't realize, I thought I didn't have. So anyway, found some, and that's all I have. So what I'm doing here now is just placing everything on top, making sure the alignment is right. And all I'm going to do now, I'm measuring it, making sure that once it goes over, it's fine. Now I really wanted to have a thick piece of Velcro, but I didn't have enough. That's all I have. So, and I didn't want to continue. So what I decided was to measure the length that I wanted and add 2 pieces. Okay, so I cut it to the same length. Once I was happy with that, I then decided which area I want to have the side that, how it's going to stick together. So I put 2 of the same on one side and the other on the other side. So I made sure I had enough for both of the areas that's going to wrap around him. So where you see now, and then at the top where it's lapped over. So I'm peeling it off so that I can see which side I need to put down first. It doesn't really matter, to be honest, but I'm going to put 2 of the same on one side and the other, obviously. Okay, and I'm going to put them quite close to each other so that it looks like a really thick piece. So I know I have enough. So once I put it on, it's going to be nice and structured. Ideally, I probably would have liked a bigger one, but I think that's fine. And then I'm going to put the other one, the other side, under. Just a little tip here, just make sure that you remove your walking foot, only because I am using that really thin Velcro and I've put the two together. So I'm trying to really capture just the edge of the Velcro so that I can actually sew it down properly. So I'm using my 1/4 inch feet, but yet again, you've got to remember to lengthen your stitch, okay? So that it moves over quite easily. Remember, it is quite a lot of layers and it's quite thick. Also, as a reminder, as I was sewing, I did realize because my 1/4 inch feet has a little bit of a hook at the end, it kept getting stuck. So if your 1/4 inch feet hasn't got that sort of hook at the end or that guide that really sticks out as mine does, then you're good to go. But you can also use your utility feet, but just make sure you get to the edge of the Velcro where you're not actually stitching on the Velcro itself. But just wanted to give you that little tip there.
Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're giving me wind and rain. up my appetite.
Jackson, wet Jackson. Jackson. Alrighty there, I'll let you go your way. Good fit, guys. Good fit. I'll give you a side shot if you would let me. Well done, Jackson. Alrighty, guys. Pretty cool.